Hey everybody, welcome back to Sacred Health. I'm Carolyn, and today I get to interview Trish Gent. Is it Gent or Gent? Because I should
Nope,
have.
it's Jen. You got
It's
it
Gent. Okay.
right.
So like
Thank
usually,
you.
oh my gosh, usually I ask ahead of time, and I read it in my mind, but I was like, oh, I probably should have double checked after I said it out loud. I was like, wait.
No, you said it right. And it's really funny because when I first got married, like to me, I'm like, oh, it's Jen. It's easy. And I remember my husband saying, he's like, yeah, short for gentleman. And then once I got married, I remember being on the phone with some like company, like credit company or whatever, and they're like, "We can't find you in the system." And he's like in the background telling me, he was like, "Make sure you spell it Gent." And I'm like, he's telling me all these things to do, and they didn't find me in the system. I had to go through all those things. They eventually found me, but they were spelling it with like they were like, "Oh, we're going Gent," and I'm like, "What?" Gent, I
Gent.
don't understand, like short for gentleman. Like, how are we
Mhm.
missing this? But no, I get it. I have all these new pronunciations now that people, they think it's like against or, and I'm like, but there's no A.
Yeah, it's
So
just English is hard.
words are hard.
Yeah, words are hard. I get my name. Yeah, people call me Caroline, Carol, like just Carol. Yeah, just and the spelling too. It just,
Oh,
you know,
yes.
just
Trust
like
me. Yes,
you just call me Care. That's short enough. It's fine.
I know.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'd like to formally introduce you to everybody. So, oh, computer, please work for me. Okay. Technology's been rough today. All right. Trish is a registered nurse turned life coach, Kundalini yoga instructor, and co-host of the Wellness Empowerment Project podcast. As she pursued professional advancement, the anxiety and stress that she managed for most of her life continued with no relief. After taking an impromptu Kundalini yoga class on her bed one day, a distinct shift was realized. From there, her desire to learn what shifted brought her to recognize that her nervous system was unregulated. Once you get a regulated nervous system, it changes your outlook on life and relationship with yourself. And again, she's the host of the Wellness Empowerment Project podcast with her friend Julie, right?
Yes, yes. My
Yes.
friend Julie and I, we
Hmm.
both work together as managers, so nursing managers. So yes, actually, that's kind of brings us full circle.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to get to talk to you. We've been in touch on and off for a while. I don't even remember how we found each other, honestly. Um,
I
just I think
know
we were both starting our podcast.
around the same time.
Uh-huh.
I think it was from one of the Facebook groups, the podcast
Yeah.
collaborators, and
Yeah, was it?
I think so. And I think we just started. We moved over to Instagram, and we just kind of kept
Hmm.
chatting, and it
Yeah.
brought us here finally.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So I know on your podcast you went into this at the very beginning, explaining your journey a little bit and how you went from nurse, I mean, you're still in nursing, but from
Yeah.
nursing to, that level of stress and burnout, and then like Kundalini yoga just stumbled upon you. Can you dive more into that experience?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I think anxiety was something that I just always accepted was a part of my life. Especially when I was younger, I was very clear of who I was. I was a type A, high achiever, always wanting to like set goals for myself and achieve those goals, always raising the bar. Um, and, my dad always kind of, was stressed and my mom was always worrying about something. And, um, overall just felt like, oh, this is just something that everyone has and you just always have to manage. And I guess maybe subconsciously, but eventually became conscious that I felt like if I achieve this goal, I won't have to worry about these things anymore. Once I, sorry, once I make this amount of money, I'm not going to have to worry about this anymore. Once I, get to this place in my career, then I won't have to keep working towards this next level. Once I get this degree, I could be done with this. And I guess I kept waiting to be done with something. And, I got to this point where I was pretty much, I would say, where I wanted to be. You know, I was working as a manager at this point. I finished my master's, overall doing well. And I remember sitting back and thinking to myself, is this it? So I just keep going up this rung. And and I remember thinking like, well, I'm not really getting what I want or what I thought I was going to get out of this because I was still working like crazy, you know, and I could say, you know, yes, it was a lot of hours in the week, you know, definitely way over 40. I remember at one point my goal was to get under 50 hours a week. Um, but it really wasn't just the hours, it was just that it carried through. Um, I remember even saying on like Friday afternoons by like 1 o'clock, I'd be like so exhausted, I'd be like, I have nothing left to give. So I would, you know, crush it during the work week, leaving early, getting home really late, and then on the weekend still trying to keep up with emails, but just be so mentally exhausted and fatigued that I didn't really want to do much else. And and then we have the daily stuff of life, right? Like the house, the laundry, you know what I mean? The family gatherings. So it just seemed very like, okay, something must be missing. Yeah. Something must be missing. And uh, I don't know what it is. So I think I was just reading through Mind Body Green and I was just like flicking through and it said on there, rose meditation to change your frequency. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, and mind you, at this point, I've tried guided meditations. I've tried, you know, doing like yoga at home. All the things that like, you know, you check the box you say you do to decrease stress and prevent burnout. And I was going through the motions, but I can't say I was feeling any relief. So I went through and read this little splurt about, you know, about raising your frequency. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. Maybe my frequency is just really low and I need to increase it so I can have that more capacity. And I clicked on the link and the link was Guru Jaquette talking about Kundalini Yoga. And she was talking about how it's a technology, you know, using angles and triangles and mantra and sound and all these different things to change your frequency and your capacity. And it really, it hit home for me, especially when you started talking about the nervous system, the glandular system. And probably because I'm a nurse, that really hit home. And I'm like, ooh, okay, so this is having a direct physical impact on my body. And I'm like, okay. So in the midst of this, you know, she then says the point of like, well, I guess now we have to do some yoga. And I'm like, oh, you know, I'm thinking I'm just watching this like, you know, 10 or 15-minute clip. Apparently it was like an hour and like probably 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes. Like it was actually her talking and doing a full class. So I'm on my bed and I'm like, you know what? I'm literally not ready, you know what I mean, to like go and move myself to like a yoga mat or anything. I'm like, let me just see what happens. So I sat on the bed and I just did the practice that she did. And it did go into this meditation. And, you know, was my mind still thinking of things? Yes, 100%. But I actually felt different. After the whole thing was over, I was like, whoa, something felt different. Something shifted. I don't know. I didn't know what it was. I don't know what it did. I just knew that I needed to know more. So I just, being the nurse that did also have a background in clinical research, I just wanted to start investigating, and almost doing like my own little personal experiment with myself. Mm-hmm. And I just started finding stuff online. I just started doing, you know, practices myself, not knowing what I was doing in any way, shape or form. Just like, all right, I don't know what these words mean. I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that I feel better and different when I'm doing it. And lo and behold, I think within 3 to 4 months, I was like, all right, I think I need to go do teacher training. Now, mind you, at this point, I've never taken an in-person class. I didn't even know why I was doing teacher training. I didn't think I was actually going to be teaching yoga. And to be honest, the first thought that came into my mind was, I don't look like a yoga teacher. I don't have the yoga body. But the other part of me was like, I just want to know more and I'm just going to do it. And that was probably one of the first times that I just jumped on board with something um, without having a clear, direct outcome of what I desired it to be. So yeah, so that's kind of how it all started. So I'll pause for a minute and see where you want to go from there.
I love that. What hit with me, because I've done Kundalini yoga a couple times specifically, and like the first time, this was like years ago, and I was definitely not open to, I mean, I was like kind of open to meditation, you know, like you said, but Kundalini is so different than other types of meditations that I had done or yoga that I've done. So then I was kind of like, what is happening? You know, like it was just so different, like the breath of fire and just like the it's just different. If you've never done it, it's just different. And um I could see how maybe at first someone might be like confused or just a little bit like, I'm gonna process this and just see how it is. But it's very impactful what I have, like once I let go of feeling like awkward, you know what I mean? It is
Oh,
very impactful.
well, for anyone who hasn't done it, and well, let's just be honest for it, right? Kundalini yoga is totally known as the weird yoga, right? It's
Yeah.
totally the weird one because it's bringing in, breath work, it's bringing in the physical practices, it brings in mantra, but really embedded into the class as well is really like discussion about how this can all be related to your own life and the relaxation is built in as well as doing that meditation afterward. And I think that in the exploration of kundalini yoga was the first time that I realized that the purpose of yoga was to prepare you for meditation.
Good way to look
And
at it.
I'm not saying that that the guided meditations I was trying to do beforehand would have suddenly worked if I did yoga beforehand. I think personally for me, it still would have gotten me to the place I needed to go. However, it starts to bring a different perspective of when are we wanting to meditate and how are we bringing that meditation into our life and what meditation could possibly be best depending on what goals you're going to achieve. So I feel like we do this, well, we do this a lot here in this world, right? We like to do these broad brush approaches for everything, right?
Yeah.
Just meditate. And
It'll
everyone's sitting
fix
there
everything.
like, there's like 15 different types of meditation,
Yeah.
right? How do I start? How long do I need to do it for? What am I trying to achieve out of this? And, and then you do it. And let's say you do just try one. And then afterwards, you're like, my mind was still racing the whole time. Did I do it wrong? I don't know if I felt anything different. And, I think it'd be very overwhelming,
Hmm.
for someone who's like literally just sitting back for the first time and being like, okay, I'm reading, I should meditate, but now what?
Yeah, it could be very overwhelming, confusing. Yeah. And like that, especially the whole mind racing thing. Um, like I did an episode kind of talking about that of like when you meditate, it's not that you don't think of anything. Your brain will always think of something, but it's noticing it, even acknowledging that you're thinking or that you notice a thought has popped up and then focusing back on the intention. It's just like the redirection
Mhm.
is the practice.
Yes, it's
But people
allowing,
don't
no,
get that that's not what's commonly said, you know what I mean?
no, it's
Yeah.
not. And just to kind of circle back to the purpose of yoga is to prepare for meditation, quieting our mind and giving our mind that rest that meditation provides, as well as that focus that meditation provides. If our body still has energy it needs to exert, it's going to be very hard to sit still like that. And
Hmm.
that's one of the reasons why it's talked about that you should do some yoga first, is to get rid of that energy. But also the practice of yoga and the specific postures that you're in, the postures that you're doing, as well as the breath work, it starts to recalibrate your nervous system. So that's why if someone goes into a yoga class and they have this great experience in this space, and then they leave the class, they try to do it at home, and it's not the same. And a lot of times it's because we did not get some of those intricate instructions that are actually so minute that they're actually starting to recalibrate the nervous system, but you don't realize it.
Yeah.
And then when you're doing the meditation, why I believe the kundalini meditations were most effective for me, especially if you have this really busy mind, is because you're focusing on so many different things. You have the posture you're focusing on. Sometimes you're having an arm movement, sometimes just in a hand position or a mudra. You're having an eye gaze, which is how you're placing your eyes during that time. Then you may be chanting a mantra or whispering a mantra or mentally vibrating a mantra, and or you'll have a breath practice with it. So you're usually not just lying there, like in my very beginning stages, lying there listening to a guided meditation and wondering why my brain cannot focus in on the things of what they're saying. You're focusing now on, a hand movement or a hand posture, a breath work, and your eye gaze. At a minimum, you're focusing on three things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're still going to have thoughts come in, but it's acknowledging it, allowing it to go by, and then bring yourself back up to that practice. And I think because there's so much to focus in on the Kundalini meditations, when you have that hyperactive mind, you need more things to focus on, and you need something to go back to.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have something to go back to, that's when you're going to start to allow yourself down that rabbit hole of whatever thought drew into your mind.
Mm-hmm. And it's so easy for that to just keep going. Like,
Oh, sure.
Like, there's times where I'm zoning out, whether it's during meditation or otherwise, where it's like I don't even realize how much time has passed that I've just been like thinking about anything. It happens so fast.
Well, and let's face it too, sometimes we allow that to happen because we enjoy it, especially when we're in this culture, which we're in, that we feel like we can think our way out of any problem. So, something comes to mind in meditation, and sometimes, and I feel guilty of it too, where you're like, I'm going to allow this thought to go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because I somehow feel like I'm being productive doing so. But really, does it get solved that way? Right? It's just a ruminating thought, which you're just activating that portion of your brain. You're not actually getting them into that meditative state, which is a whole different brainwave, where there's alpha brainwaves.
And I think letting our thoughts kind of spiral, or just focusing, how do I say this, being in our head a lot, that's just like disassociation too sometimes of what's going on around us. We might not be like problem solving in our mind. We might just be, like you said, kind of ruminating on something. And it's like a form of distraction if not done in the right way.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up. So for talking about the nervous system, we actually have, I would say, our second line of defense if there's any sort of fear or scarcity, is the sympathetic portion of the nervous system. That's the fight or flight that everyone's kind of heard about. And you can have a lot of overactive thoughts in that point, and your thoughts are going in 10 million different directions. But in that state, you tend to be a little more hypervigilant, and your body and your brains talk to each other. And there's this portion in our brain called the insula that is interpreting the information from your body going to your brain, and it's part of that feedback loop. So when you are in that state, and that state could be associated with anxiety as well, you could be misinterpreting information from your body. So if you're having this thought of, oh my God, what if all these bad things are happening? You're giving that feedback to your body. Your body is essentially reacting, in either a fight or a flight state, depending what you tend to lean towards. And it's bringing that communication back. So you end up in that loop. Now, with that said, because you said the word disassociation, the third line of defense in our body is now the more we call it the dorsal state. So I know we've all heard about like the possum. We're gonna play possum playing dead.
Yeah.
You're in that like freeze capacity. So, freeze is a combination of a dorsal and sympathetic state where you have all this energy inside, but you cannot move. But then you also could have like a shutdown state or dissociation state where your head is definitely you're not grounded, you're not connected in your body. So you may look like you're going through the motions of life, but you're not really connected to it in any like real active capacity. And a lot of people who exhibited childhood trauma tend to kind of like live in some sort of dissociative state. And you could also look at, now linking back to that insula portion, if someone's in a depressive state, the insula is not really reading, the brain is not reading the cues from the body, and they're not really talking to each other, which starts to make sense. If you're in that dorsal state and you're more dissociative, more shut down, that portion of the brain is not really reading everything between the head and between the body. So just kind of wanted to highlight that, because this is really how, when we start talking about the yoga and the meditation and the nervous system, how it's really all linked together. Our brain and our body are not separate. It's really all together. And I really feel like once we get a handle of our nervous system, it does impact how we view the world, how we view ourselves, and how we view how we can be an active participant in our own lives.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to explain that too. I've heard of the dorsal state. It's definitely like a newer term for me anyway, that initially it was always fight or flight, like that's it. But then the freeze, the shutdown. I've definitely experienced that myself, the state of, it's like I know I have things to do, but I just feel so frazzled or overwhelmed by it that I'm just like, I don't know. And I just like don't do anything. And then that causes more stress later on because I didn't do what I needed to do. And it just kind of builds. So for someone in that freeze state, what is a way? I mean, it sounds simple to be like you just do something, but like if you're in that state, it feels so like
Debilitating.
Yeah, that's a great way to, like, how can someone overcome that feeling of like stuckness?
Yeah, so this is actually a really great question. I'm happy you asked this. So one thing I want to definitely emphasize is that, our brains are neuroplastic, which means that they can change. They can change. And I also want to start by dispelling this like myth. There really isn't a lot of data that supports that anxiety is genetic. What it does support, though, is it can be a learned behavior. So somewhere along the line, we learned that this was the way we could react to any time in our environment where we feel fear, stress, and especially if it happens in your childhood, depending on the household you grew up with, depending on things that happened, whether it's, big trauma or little trauma. And I usually don't like to use those terms. I think a lot of people may not feel like they've had, quote, trauma, or may not feel like their experiences were, quote, traumatic worthy.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, and even though, yes, there are large scale traumatic experiences that people have had, at the end of the day, really trauma can be how our body responded to an event that occurred. So if we kind of take that out of it, if our body learns to respond to events in a certain way, and we become comfortable, our body becomes comfortable, right? Because it's now familiar and it feels safe reacting in that way. Even though it may not be the healthiest way, that is what you have adapted to. So that's kind of the first thing, is I like to kind of dispel some of those myths and kind of take the pressure off. That's not you. This is what your body has done to keep you safe over time. But yes, if you start to notice that you're in a freeze state, I talked about that the sympathetic was like your second line of defense and the dorsal is like the third line of defense. And I think this is a great piece to kind of talk about that. If you're in these states, the first goal is to move out of the dorsal state. And once you move out of the dorsal state, you're not just going to go straight to ventral. You're going to move out of the dorsal state, which is the state of almost like inaction, in motion. And then you're going to go into the sympathetic, which is actually now moving up, right? It's a step into getting you to that ventral, that regulated state. So, and I'm saying this because I did have a couple of clients that, originally were working with getting them out of that dorsal state. And then they ended up, now having to use different tools to get themselves out of the sympathetic state to then get into a more regulated state. So I think a big piece of this is, one, understanding your body, understanding your mind, and understanding and recognizing how you feel and in what state you are in. Because that's important, because with our brain being neuroplastic and being able to change and learn new things, it also needs to be, it's also very linked with specificity, as in you need to be doing the right things at the right time. So I think a lot of people have had the experience of, oh, I have, blanket word, anxiety. And then I tried blanket word, the one inhale to the longer exhale, right? And then afterwards they're like, but I didn't feel any better, or it didn't improve anything. You're laughing. So I feel like I'm going to pause for a minute because I feel like this sounds relatable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So using that as an example, because this actually happened with a client of mine, and she's a breathwork instructor too. So we learned that she was originally in the dorsal state. And I'll get specifically to freeze mode, but this is really important, because if you're in freeze and you're having both those states, you still want to work on that dorsal state first. So the thing with the dorsal state is that typically, you are in the opposite mode of the sympathetic. So sympathetic, you may have a higher heart rate, higher blood pressure, right? A lot of high energy activation. Whereas the dorsal state, you may have a lower blood pressure, lower heart rate. And what we want to do is get some activation there. So if someone's doing a 1-2 breath, as in a longer exhale to a shorter inhale, you're actually decreasing your heart rate and possibly deepening yourself into that dorsal state, making it even harder to get out of it. So that's why I think the first thing is recognizing your state is really important, and then recognizing what you should be doing and trying those things that are specific to that state to help move you out of it. Is the second piece. And then obviously being consistent with yourself. So if we are living in a stress response, whether it's you're living in the dorsal state or living in a sympathetic state, if you're living in that state, you could have, I would say, a lower threshold or a lower capacity for being in that regulated state. So there's two things we can be doing to actually increase that threshold for yourself. And one, obviously, is, like we said, recognizing the states, and two, doing the correct nervous system practices that are associated with those states. But also not just doing it in real time when you feel it, because sometimes people are going to find that difficult. So I like to do the two-prong approach of, let's start a daily practice that is a nervous system regulating practice with the state that you're currently living in. And then as you're doing that, we will start working with other tools that when you notice a dysregulation or you're noticing things that are happening, you can do those tools to help you move out as well. So you're actually creating trust in your body by doing something that is a routine practice. as you are starting to expand your threshold and creating that safe trust and creating that safety and trust within your own nervous system. Now with freeze specifically, like I said, we want to start with that dorsal state. One thing, and some of this is playing around. And so when I said recognizing and knowing your body, some of it is playing around of what works best for me. So there's a couple ways you can go about this. I tend to, because I'm a nurse, I think of the way of we go from least invasive and then most to most invasive. Or another way, you know, from the nervous system component, you kind of go from things that are more, you know, external proprioception to then interoception inside of you. So sometimes starting with like a breath may be too much for somebody. So let's start with things that are kind of on the outside. So it could be as simple as contact points. Can we notice where there is pressure on our body? How is that chair feeling on your butt? How is, you know, it feeling in different areas? The shoes are feeling on your feet. Can we just, you know, start to notice how our body is feeling in relation to pressure? And then maybe can we start some micro movements? Just, you know, moving your finger so slowly, especially if you're in that freeze state. Then can we make that movement a little bigger? And continue to make it even larger. And once we kind of maybe move that, okay, now can we maybe go to a 1-to-1 breath? Equal inhale, equal exhale. Or would this be a time that you can maybe get some breath of fire in as well? But it's also, you know, seeing like maybe you just need to start noticing where there's pressure. Maybe you just need to start some of those little movements to help move yourself into the next direction. You don't have to do all those things, but let's start with seeing so it's not so overwhelming. Mm-hmm. How is our body relating to the space that we're in? And then maybe how can we get some movement in here? And then last but not least, can we actually get, you know, some breath in there? Because if someone is already in one of these states, starting with how you're feeling can be very, very difficult. And I remember, you know, even hearing a lot of like, notice how you're feeling, notice what's going on in your body. And if you're already living in a dysregulated state, that can be very difficult. And like I said before, right, with that insula, if you're on the dorsal side, you're not really reading things. And if you're in the sympathetic side, it's feasible that you're almost getting so much information, you're not able to differentiate what is of you or what's not of you and what's accurate. So that's why I think it's important that we just kind of start with external. Mm-hmm. And you may just need one thing, or you may need two things. But the first portion of the freeze mode is like, let's get some movement, let's get some activation back. Mm-hmm. And how can we do that in a way that is gentle with ourselves?
That's great. That was a great way to explain those different states and different steps, because that's something I never thought about, was even like having the awareness of like, where am I actually at? And like, what do I need? Because there was a time recently where I was feeling very anxious. And so my first thought is like, I need to do a meditation and like calm myself down. But, you know, now after hearing what you have to say, it's like, if I think back on that, if I had the knowledge that you just said, maybe I would have handled it differently. If I had more awareness of like, what state am I actually in? Do I need to calm down my breathing and my heart rate, or do I need to activate it a little bit more actually to move that anxiety out?
Right. You know? And even before then too, right? Do I have energy I truly need to discharge? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to get outside? Do I need to move my body? Or is it, do I need to get back into my body? Do I need to do tapping and just start like tapping areas of my body just to bring myself back in? Do I need to, another one is pushing against the wall and getting that pressure back into your body. So as you could tell, you're doing very different practices of whether you're trying to come back into your body out of that dorsal state versus in that sympathetic state, trying to release energy.
Pushing against the wall. I've never done that. Like
Yeah.
intentional, like I don't.
Yeah. If you are in, especially if you're in that dorsal state and we have that disconnection, when you think about it, right, you're trying to get yourself back into the body. And one way to do that is putting pressure on that body. So this is why we kind of, you could start by contact points, noticing where there's pressure on the body where you physically are. You say it's tapping, but put a little fist and just start hitting areas of your body, your arms, your legs. How does that feel? And then are we able to stand up and put our hands against the wall and give that pressure? So it's basically 3 different ways, right, that we're generating energy, contact, sensation back into the body.
And just bringing that awareness of like, just even realizing that when we move, it affects what's around us. And I'm like trying to figure out how to say this. It's just having awareness that we have the senses and the ability to take in what is happening to us in return too,
Yes. So we're not a victim to how we're feeling. We actually can change it. And just kind of going back where I kind of mentioned, you may be in a space like a yoga class and you're like, you have this great experience. You go out and you're like, why can't I recreate this? And some of it is these subtle things that you do, or at least that I do when I start a class as well. And one thing is, what's your posture? So I do a bolster introduction whenever a new person comes into my class. And we talk about what that proper alignment is. And, it's even if you're sitting in a chair, it's kind of that same piece. So our posture, one thing is, all right, are you super tense? Because if you're super tense, right, again, sympathetic state, can we start loosening things up? But if you're in a flight mode or you're more that dorsal state, are you standing up straight? Are you very hunched over?
Yeah.
If you're hunched over like that, your lungs, your heart, they're all contracted. They're closed up. And you're essentially telling your body now is telling your brain that I'm not safe. It's not safe for me. And I'm just trying to get small and get away. And I'm saying this because think of how much we're unconsciously doing some of these things. I actually had a client who was also in my kundalini classes, and she was moving herself out of disassociative as well. And she works at a desk all day. So I said, I'm like, okay, let's talk about these little things that we can also do. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm hunched over all day. All right, let's get her, how can we be set up in a good posture during most of our day? And a lot of the things are really simple. And it's the same thing I'll say using a bolster in a yoga class. You want your knees to be below your hips. If your knees are below your hips, it's a lot easier keeping that spine straight. Are your feet able to be flat on that floor? Because with that straight spine, you're now in that ventral state. You're in that connective state. So we're starting a yoga class. Let's get in that right posture, right? And then, we will start with some, hey, noticing what's on the outside, noticing how it's affecting you, noticing the hot and the cold. And then we move into the actual breath. And then, yes, we have the co-regulation piece, because with that ventral portion, that connective portion, it's not just with us, but also connected to our facial muscles as well. So this is the social engagement theory. So you're around people, right, that you enjoy spending time with, that you're being a nice little reflection for you. So you combine all of those experiences together. This could be one of the reasons why it's maybe difficult for you to replicate this experience at home. Are you setting yourself up in the same way? Are you giving yourself that time to kind of notice and rebalance and get back in to yourself? Or are you just like sitting down and being like, all right, it's time to do it?
Yeah, just trying to rush
Right?
through. And even like the setting of your space, generally a studio, that is very intentional of the layout and the energy in that space. It's going to be calming, or if it's like a more active exercise class, it'll pump you up and make you feel like ready to go. But like if the space you have at home does not match that, if it's like cluttered and stressful, or you know what I mean, you're not going to get the same effect.
Oh, sure. Or people talk about this with sleep, right? And how your bedroom should be used for sleep. You shouldn't have a TV in there. I mean, now we're even saying we shouldn't have our phones in there.
Hmm.
You really want, especially with the melatonin in your eyesight, you really want to make sure it's dark. Decrease noise. You want that relaxing environment for your own sleep. And if you're someone who wants to do yoga, wants to do meditation, or even take both of that out of it, you want to regulate your nervous system so you can perform better, and that you can, change, areas of your life. You still would love to set up a space where it's dedicated, where you're dedicating yourself for you. It doesn't have to be big,
Hmm.
be very small. And a lot of the nervous system practices that I teach, yeah, a lot of them are very much in line with the yogic practices, but also some of them are ones that you can do anywhere. It's also about finding what can I do in real time
Hmm.
versus what can I do at home.
Yeah.
But I think there's a great importance to setting something up for yourself with that self-care at home, because you are now developing that relationship with yourself, a relationship with your nervous system, and that relationship will start to build as you're actually building trust with yourself. No matter what practice you're doing, whether it's a clearly defined yogic meditation practice, a nervous system practice, I would include journaling
Hmm.
practice. All those things are changing. They're more ritualistic than they are habitual, because they're changing your own frequency
Hmm.
through your relationship with it.
Yeah, that's a great distinction too. Um, because habitual is kind of just, you kind of go through it and it's like brushing your teeth, and there's not generally, unless you make it intentional, a spiritual thing. It's like something like that, as simple as brushing your teeth. You do it every day, but it's not like, yeah, like you said, ritualistic, spiritualistic. It's just a thing you do.
Yeah. So a habit is something that's completely like unconscious. I mean,
Hmm.
how many times have we woken up in the morning and we just start brushing our teeth? We're not thinking about it, right? It's totally unconscious. But a ritual is something that changes your frequency. So definitely two different intents. Now, if you do a ritual long enough, it could totally end up being, into that subconscious space.
Hmm.
But you want there to be a consciousness to make it as part of your ritual.
Yeah.
Even if you're doing the same meditation, the same practice, the same journaling, even if you're doing the same thing every day, bringing that conscious intent to it is what's helped changing that and the practice, but really it's that conscious intent that is making it more ritualistic, and that's what's helping to change the frequency with it.
Hmm. This is so good. I love talking about stuff like this. That's
Me too.
great. What, so for someone who is trying to set, like maybe they've never really set intentions about anything, like they've just kind of been going through motions and now they want more clarity on something. Like, do you have a suggestion of like questions they can ask themselves to kind of figure out how to even start?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would say is that I think that this is a great time, if you don't already, to journal your questions. So when I say journal them, I mean write them down, pen and paper. There is something about this brain, connection with writing things on paper, using your own penmanship, you're holding the hand, very different than just typing something out.
Mhm.
And I would actually start with what, I hate to use the word goal, right? Because the goal is very like, oh, SMART goals. How do we get from here to here? So, but if you're trying to figure out, like, I don't even know what my intention would be, I would start with, how do you want to feel? And how often do you want to feel this? And it's okay if you think it's unattainable, you know, but if even that is too difficult for you, and I'm acknowledging that because as someone who lived with anxiety for a lot of her life, I would look at somebody who I thought was like calm, cool, and collected, and or happy so much, and they did not portray that they had any worry. And I'd look at that and I'd be like, wow, that just seems so unattainable to me, right? Um, so if it's too hard for you to conceptualize how you want to feel, or how do you want to be, start with, what do you want to release? Because
I like
sometimes if you
that.
just write down what you want to release, then you are creating that space within yourself to then really get clear on what you want to bring in.
Yeah. I like the wording you said, because most people are like, say what you don't want. But I think that was powerful how you flipped that and just said, what do I want to release and let go of? It's just
Yeah.
like, you know how our brains do the whole, like, if you say you don't want it, you focus on the word that you don't want. And you know what I
Yes.
mean? It's the
Yeah.
phrasing
Yeah.
is important. So I like how you said that. What do you want to
Well,
release?
and the other piece is too, when we talk about things we want to change in life, we very much focus on the external thing. I want a morning practice. I want to meditate. Okay, we do, but what's underneath of that, right? What is the true intention? What's your true desire? And, I think if we have not experienced something before, it's hard to put into words. And it's hard to put into words because your body may not feel like it's attainable. And if you don't feel like it's attainable, you're not going to be like, you're going to write down, it's going to feel empty. Because the intention really, it should be something that lights you up, that you get excited about. But if you feel like it's not attainable, we're just not there yet. So it's like, how do we get there? And if we look at what do we want to release, maybe you're just releasing your constant anxiety. Great. So what is actually that anxiety feeling like in your body now? And can it actually start helping us to take the steps to start to communicate of what we are experiencing, so then we can be clear of what we want to experience.
Yeah, that brings a lot of awareness, I think, to, like you said, the feeling or like the ideal situation. You might not have like the vocabulary or just the comprehension of like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But it's easier to realize, okay, well, I don't like feeling anxious, if we're going to stick with that example, so that I know I want to let go of that.
Yeah. And let's get clear on, how is that showing up in your life? And this is where coaching comes in, right?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't, and I think this is the value of having a coach, because then we would really dive into, like, okay, not only was that anxiety feeling like for you, how is that showing up in your life? How are you reacting to things? Okay, you reacted to this in this way. What would you like to have done? I would like to respond, but in this manner instead. Okay, but in order to respond in this manner, we need to get rid of these, not get rid of, but we want to release, right? This feeling of control, this feeling of urgency. Okay, what's the opposite of that, right? So you could see that it's more of just, not just like a one or two, script. If it's something you want to dive into, these are definitely ways to get deeper. If you're not sure what you want, what do we want to release?
And coaching is great. Having a mentor of some kind, it's like they give you the tools that can help you learn these skills for life. You know, a coach is not, if a coach is going to tell you they want to keep you forever, they're not a good coach, because a coach is supposed to give you skills
Mhm.
so you can blossom and like
Yes.
expand yourself. And then like, you know, you can check in every now and then like, hey, what's up? But like they don't have to like rely on you forever. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. And I actually do. I actually have a client right now. When we first signed on, she was like, okay, but I can't do this forever. And I'm like, our goal is for you not to do this forever. Like our
Mhm.
goal is that you have the tools, so that, you have the capacity to do this on your own.
Yeah.
What I think is magical about coaching, because obviously, like I think anyone who is a coach, a lot of us we've had those deep, impactful coaching experiences, and we want to open the space and have that with other people because we've been impacted so deeply on it. We want to help
Mhm.
others to be deeply healed. I feel like it's one of the only places where we are working with somebody and we're helping you achieve your goal. And what other profession or what other relationship do you have someone 110% behind what you want and what you desire with no other agenda, with no other strings attached,
Mhm. Yeah.
and
It's a
meeting
good
you
question.
where you are?
Yeah. That's a big one too, is meeting
Yeah,
somebody where they're at, putting your, you know, it's like you have to put yourself aside sometimes to be able to help somebody where they are, and
mhm,
recognize even if something helps me more, I need to let that go and be like, what is going to help them more?
100%. And, it's also this very different way of thinking. Whereas I think with coaching, it's that the client knows what to do. We're just facilitating the space for them to get there.
Mm, yeah. Oh man, that's good. Because that's something I've been
Oh,
learning. I'm finishing up my coaching, integrative nutrition coaching.
congratulations.
Literally in like a month I'll be done with it. But dude, that is so prominent of what they've been stressing, is that like we are just guides. The client knows. And it's so funny doing coaching practices, and you know, we've done like practice sessions with classmates, and I've done some with like other people outside of the program. We don't, I think there's a misconception that like a coach is gonna know everything and they just tell you what to do, but it's more so we just listen to you and
Mhm.
ask the right questions to get you to come up with the solution that you already have.
Yeah, yeah, and creating that space to do so.
Hmm.
I think what's different, especially nowadays in the age of the internet, you can find out how to do everything you want. Okay, how should I meditate? How should I do this? Right? You could look
Yeah.
it all up. You could try to do it. Um, but I think the difference is that with coaching, though, it's not the knowledge. It's how are we integrating into our life so we can
Hmm.
have that impactful change that we truly desire.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can't always do on our own. Some people may be very good at it, but then it's how can I shift that experience to be something I want?
Yeah.
Because either people fall into two categories. Either you are super disciplined and you're able to integrate something you want to change and you just do it, but you're doing it with such tenacity that you burn out. Or
Hmm.
not even just that you burn out, you may be missing that connection, that deeper connection. So you're doing the same thing over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Um, you're missing the deeper impact, the deeper meaning. Or you have the other extreme where people say they want to start something and they may do it and then it falls off and then they can't get back on again. And
Hmm.
we're in a similar cycle. We're in the same cycle of repeating itself, but we're not able to get out of that cycle. And that's
Yeah.
where I feel like the coach is there to support because we're looking at things from so many different angles that are very specific to you.
Hmm.
And it's hard to do it yourself. And I think at the
It
end of the
is.
day, we're not meant to do all this alone.
No,
Like,
no
like
way.
we said earlier, like words are hard. Yeah, being human is hard. Living in
Yeah.
this world is hard. Making change is hard when there's constant change around you. How the heck are you supposed to change yourself? And
Yeah.
when you look at it that way, right, it sounds like we're in an ever like losing battle, right? Because
Hmm.
you have your job changing, the country changing, everything changing around you. And then how are you supposed to focus on changing yourself when you're balancing so many different hats? And that's, I think, the power of coaching is people also coming to this awareness that you're not meant to do this alone, and we can be here to empower and support each other.
Yeah. So true. So it's so, I mean, I've felt what it's like to feel like there's no support or very little, or like very little community around me,
Mhm.
like in my literal area where I live, you know what I mean? And it is hard. It does wear you down and like mentally, you know? So having, especially when you're trying to venture out and do a new lifestyle shift, that it's like if you don't have some support, whether it's like in your physical space or, you know, with a coach,
Mhm.
of course it's going to make it harder to make that sustainable, you know, because
Yeah,
you're changing whole patterns of what you're doing, you know, you need that support.
100%. And you could know what to do, doesn't mean you know how to do it.
Mhm. And two, I think, oh, that's so good because it's like there's so many things in life where I'm like, I know these things are like the right things to do, but it's like implementing them and being
Hmm.
consistent is the part that trips me up a lot, you know?
Oh, sure. And I think that's, you're not alone in that. You
Mm-mm.
know, um, a lot of people, uh, I think experience that. I mean, even I've experienced that in my own life, and I still do,
Mhm.
sometimes. Um, and that's where, that's the time where you want to kind of take a step back and, you know, look at, okay, is this really my priority? And what's underneath of that? So I
Yeah.
think that's where, we may think we know what we want for ourselves, but sometimes what we really desire is underneath of that.
Yeah, that's so true. I've experienced that personally, yeah. It's like you just keep peeling back layers and you're like, "Oh, that's the root."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And until you get to the roots, um, until you get to the root, it's always going to be an uphill battle.
Mhm. To expand upon the coaching, I wanted to give you a chance to share, you know, what you do as a coach and the types of people you align with in helping, just to give you space to talk about that, you know, before we
Oh,
end our, because I looked at the
thank
time,
you.
we've already been talking so long. So I'm
Oh my
like, oh,
gosh,
okay.
you're
Yeah.
right. It went by very
So
quickly.
fast.
So thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, you're
So
welcome.
thank you. So yeah, people can find me on Instagram. My name is Coach_Trish Gent, TRISHGENT. And yes, I'm also co-host of the Wellness Empowerment Project podcast. And we also have an Instagram account on there as well at Wellness Empowerment Project. And yeah, so if anyone is interested in experiencing coaching, you can totally send me a direct message on Instagram, or you can send me an email, trish@wellnessempowermentproject.com. I do a free session. My first session is free, and actually, a lot of times the second session is free too. And I do it that way because I feel like it's important for us to establish a relationship, and also for you to get to see what that experience is in your own life. And then we
Mhm.
can kind of decide, this is something you want to go on your own, or is this something you'd like my support with? A lot of what I do is I help uh, a lot of women shed anxiety and control for freedom and creativity. A lot of my clients are wanting to start something new or have dabbled in starting something new, um, but aren't there just yet, or they're noticing that they've had these habits of their whole life, and they haven't been able to make that full transformation, that full change that they're desiring to. So yeah, I do a lot of work through nervous system regulation. um, and I do believe, and I think I said this in the bio, is that once that we get reconnected with ourselves and we change that relationship to ourselves, we start to change our relationship with everything that's around us. including, whatever business or project or other relationships that we have. Being a nurse, the two things I loved about nursing is that I loved being a patient advocate and I loved solving problems. So I feel like coaching allows me to do both of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of the day, if you're interested in me being your advocate, please send a message. I'm happy to support you.
Great. That's wonderful. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I'll link, I'll have everything in the show notes, and if you're on YouTube, in the description box, so you can, easily access her and get in touch with her.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. It was a pleasure
Yeah,
talking with you.
it was great. I had a lot of fun. We'll have to have another talk some other time, because I feel like we could just
Oh, sure.
keep going on about all kinds of things.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening / watching. Please check out Trish and her practice and her podcast, the Wellness, oh my gosh, Wellness Empowerment Project podcast. I can't say that very well.
You got it. All good.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys. We will see you next time.